Glory, hallelujah. Good morning. We're going to get started right away. Glad to see everyone in 2022. Hope everyone's healthy and safe. As more of our folks join in, they'll be picking up where we are. And let me disable the waiting room so people can just join us today. I hope everyone is truly doing okay. Let me share my screen.
Good morning.
Good morning. Let's see. Okay, so today is the 18th of January, 2022. Today's session is part of what we are doing on a consistent basis to share with the community about the community's experiences and perceptions of the Baltimore City Police Department survey. Time 2. Today's discussion will be about incentives in human subject research. As we've done in the past, there is acknowledgement that some of us are not familiar with this process. And I kind of go over some things we've talked about, in previous sessions. This is recorded. So what does happen is when folks are not here during the live discussion, they're able to review the recording of which you consented to be a part of. So just to give you that heads up. And again, background, Baltimore City Police Department consent decree. Requirement is to have a community survey led by the BPD monitoring team. And we consistently share that the survey is housed in the Institute for Urban Research at Morgan State University. And these are some of the folks who work in the Institute. And you know that I'm the principal investigator, Dr. Pratt Harris. And thankfully we have Morgan State University students, grad students, and undergrad students, as well as community members who are trained community interviewers. We also acknowledge the call for proposals that went out by the BPD monitoring team in spring of 2018, if I'm not mistaken. It may have been the summer of 2018. And this kind of gives us heads up as to who the survey team includes. Now, we have one community interviewer who's on the call, and she and I can have a one-on-one chat about something we need for the spring 2022 semester. At the present time, you see the names of the folks who are on the team. For spring 2022, however, we are selecting new research assistants for spring 2022. Our undergraduate research assistants at Morgan State University are students who are actually taking a 3-credit course, and they manage many of the tasks of the community interview, which are, it's priceless in terms of the amount of work that they're able to do. And often the community research assistants, the actual undergraduate research assistants, are also able to do community interviews. The research assistant task, however, is just for credit, but the interviews, you still get compensated per interview. So just to give heads up, especially to one of our undergrads who's on the call. And the schedule is presented consistently and it remains the same. One of the minor modifications, however, is about the budget and preliminary preparation. Ms. Moore can share that notion of compensation payment, what we need to do to process incentives for participants has gone through January of 2022. So I'll tell you a little later what I mean by that, but in order to get the team compensated, that it's been a process in order to make certain that those who participate in the survey who are offered a $25 incentive, that has to get funneled through the university. And we worked on that through this month. We are in the midst, I think this is what we're calling the third wave in terms of peaks, third to fourth wave, someone can correct me, as it relates to the peaks of COVID-19 currently dealing with the Omicron uptick in positive cases. Our research team has been impacted by this, where some have tested positive, some have presented illness regarding this. And we maintain the same protocols that we began with because of our still being in a pandemic. And for the research team, we'll be continuing to follow the same processes where we're doing community interviews virtually, remotely, no face-to-face contact. If and when we are out in community, we are wearing face covering, preferably a K95 mask, staying at least 6 feet apart, and frequently washing our hands. And I'll be honest with you, when I reviewed the in-field work we've done, when we've recruited participants, I cringe because I know that at one point we were out when Omicron was on its way. And I won't say that we were necessarily 6 feet apart. So we're going to make certain that we reinforce this part of our protocols. Just to give a little heads up, Baltimore City, just like the rest of the world, has experienced this uptick. So we're following closely what the data looks like on positive cases in Baltimore City. And this is a New York Times source kind of highlighting what's happening in the city of Baltimore. And then we also acknowledge the notion of fully vaccinated. And one of the notes is that our Morgan folks are required to be fully, have at least 2 doses. And eventually it looks like there would be the potential for needing to be boosted. There's a recommendation for folks to be boosted. What we've seen in our team, or what we've seen in the city, is that has made a difference in terms of the possibility of exposure to COVID-19. So this is something that's ongoing and it's incorporated into our methodology. Just to kind of shed light on this topic on the survey process and incentives, in our invitation and announcement, the flyer and letter announcement, also the postcards, we acknowledge that participants are compensated $25 for their time, and the interviews last up to 30 minutes. So this is kind of presented at the onset when someone's kind of invited to participate. And as we've shared prior, we're following the human subject research protocols, human subject research training that every community interviewer has partaken via CITI training. We maintain the privacy, confidentiality, and anonymity of participants in a very rigorous way. This includes a whole host of things to protect human subjects. So we're following suit on that. And I had some good news. I just shared this with Aaliyah. We have a team of translators who were able to translate the survey. This is the Arabic example of the introduction. English, well, obviously English, but they're called SCOF translators, Spanish, Chinese, French. The Spanish and Russian translators, we are thankful to announce, have been compensated. That took quite a bit of time. I'm awaiting compensation for the Chinese and French translator, and the Arabic translator is international and has been since spring 2020 when this process began. We're waiting on processing her paperwork so that she can be compensated as well, but that was a process, quite frankly. One of our previous presentations was on how we go about recruiting participants, and we acknowledge the community canvassing piece. We have not knocked on doors because of the pandemic. We have been in community, however, engaging with folks when we've done the random address sample. We've also reviewed the addresses using Google Maps to confirm why and when we get mail that's kicked back to us, why that may happen. We talked about the reality that some of the addresses are quote unquote bad addresses. It may actually be a vacant space, a park that may have been an address at some point, and that's why the mail didn't go, or a structure that appears to be abandoned. So we've kind of been able to do community canvassing via Google mapping and also actual street canvassing. We've highlighted our role at part one, which is the random address sample and the random street sample. We have not, and I'm repeating this, we have not in any way moved into purposive sample, but that will make sense as we continue. One of the things we've highlighted prior to this meeting and during our updates in the fall is that we have a sample recruitment protocol that includes non-contact. So we've mailed traditional invitations, an 8.5 by 11 sheet and an 8.5 by 11, well, an 8.5 or 11 inch wide envelope. And we began mailing invitations to random addresses in September of 2021. And then we made note of the mail that was returned to us at Morgan State University. We've gone on to engage in community canvassing in October and November based upon mail that was kicked back to us. And then we've also done mailing in October, November, I'm saying October/November of 2021. We opted to do postcard mailing. And we've also made note of mail that was kicked back, even though we kind of pulled addresses that were kicked back to us before where they were bad addresses. And what we were able to do in December and actually this month is to mail out invitation via a postcard, and thankfully, thanks to our coordinator, a QR code that included a video invitation that was sent out. The first batch was sent out, I think that was December the 16th or so of 2021. It was before the university closed for the winter break. And then we double backed on those, actually those postcards were sent out all at one time. And then Leah, you might want to correct me. I don't have this date in front of me, but mid-December or so, we mailed out postcards, or it may have been the end of November. And then we had to double back at the midpoint of December to mail out traditional invitations because we needed to update the QR code with the video invitation. So for those of us who are listening today or listening to this recording, a QR code allows someone to take their phone, scan the code, and it pops up with a YouTube video, which was conducted by myself, our graduate research assistant, and one of our research assistants that offered an invitation to participate that mimics the very thing that's on the invitation itself. We thought that was a way to just engage with people because they see human faces and talking and sharing about the survey. So we did that 2 times. We had postcards sent out in December. Then we had a traditional mail sent out in December, and we sent a second batch of those invitations in January. At this point, I don't have the numbers on the returns from the mail that was sent out mid-December and as of the beginning of January. So we have to see about that. I will say that we are in the same predicament regarding responses. So these are the ways that people can respond to us to partake in the survey. There is a update form where they can, a sign-in form where they can click a link or type in a link and type in their information that they see on the invitation, and then let us know, about their availability of participating or their eligibility to participate. They can also give us a call at my office at Morgan State University. They can also send an email that we have for the community survey, and our response rate is not good in terms of the number of persons who are responding based upon those means to contact us. And that is something that we will have to kind of really dig even more deeply regarding getting persons to respond via those means, given that we are in the midst of a uptick in COVID cases where the Omicron variant has been quite impactful. Let me tell you about the impact. So one of the realities of doing community research, community surveys is this: safety and health is number one. That is very important. Safety and health is number one. In a non-pandemic world, safety means safety when commuting in communities, traffic safety. Number two, safety regarding engaging with persons that we are not familiar with or who are not familiar with us. That's number two. And in the city of Baltimore, just to give everyone heads up, when you call for emergency support, I'm talking about a medical emergency at this present time, there are little to no ambulances available. And I, in my own family, have had this reality where a person has a non-COVID related illness. And on 2 occasions, 911 was called as instructed by the doctor, the medical doctor, and an ambulance does not come to respond. And in this case, a fire truck comes because they're acknowledging that there are no ambulances out there. So when we talk about safety and health of our community interviewers or the research team, not the interviewers, because the interviewers don't do this type of recruitment, we have to be mindful that everything's strained or stressed, and we are making certain that we do the best we can given the circumstances, where we aren't knocking on doors, because all those issues of safety are compromised. And definitely health is compromised because there are strained systems at the present time with the uptick in the Omicron variant. Same thing holds true in the county. I had another family member who actually was diagnosed with COVID, and we didn't know that's what the issue was. We called 911, and it took about 15 minutes for someone to come to offer some support. And they recommended that this person does not go to the ER. They were taken to the ER and they were diagnosed with COVID, and they had almost debilitating symptoms. So this is the time we're living in, and this is how these are things I'm thinking about as we're moving forward with recruitment at this moment. You all already, many persons who've been following through on this community survey time too know that participants are randomly selected via the random street sample and random addresses. This is at part 1. And of course, the way we are engaging with the possible participants is through the mail, those letters that I mentioned before, and the postcards. We have gone out and done recruitment on the street, but that is not happening at the present time. And one of the reasons that did not happen before the Omicron uptick is because of what I mentioned in terms of incentives, having the resource to compensate the participants, of which in the next slide, I'll share what's the update on that. Just to remind folks and or give you some insight, we acknowledge that we have a sample recruited for part 1 via the invitation and confirmation that they're eligible, 18 years of age or older, and report that they live in the city of Baltimore. And that's via the random sample technique that we're following suit on right now. Later on, when we've exhausted the random sampling technique, we'll move into the purposive sampling technique, of which we highlighted before, which would include LGBTQ persons who, where English is not the primary language, squeegee kids, and persons who identify as homeless. But we're not there. We are still in part 1. And prior to this meeting, we talked about the data that comes out of the city of Baltimore, what we're looking for in terms of representation, random selection of persons with the goal of identifying a representative sample based upon the US Census quick facts. And any one of us can Google it if I'm moving too fast. But this is kind of the table we're following when we're looking at representation of participants. So here we are, incentives. So incentives mean a little more than incentives for the participants themselves, but I'm going to talk about the participants first, and then I'm going to move into the research team that we have. So what happens is participants receive an invitation. On the invitation, there's information about this survey, the fact that it is the persons were identified randomly, based upon an address, and that they can participate voluntarily, if they want to participate based upon their being eligible and selected based upon an address or the street, and they're compensated $25 for their time during a 30-minute interview, an interview that lasts about or approximately 30 minutes. And that's supposed to garner a uptick in response rate because you're offering people cash, a cash app or a check, of which these are the means by which we're paying folks for their time. And it leads to an increase in response rate. So what we are seeing at the present time is that it may not necessarily be enough because we haven't gotten people, necessarily bringing the phones off the hook or sending the emails or clicking that link to sign up to participate via the mail. Now, we know, as was discussed, probably the first community report we gave, that this is not the best way to do research. This is not the best way to sample participants or identify a sample. Mail in anything. You could have a mail-in survey. You can have a mail-in invitation like we had. This is not the best way to identify participants, but it is the way that we're using given the fact that we are surviving a pandemic. I would like to see the Higher Education Research Institute at the University of California, Los Angeles, where I'm referencing this notion of participation rates over time, us to look at what makes the difference in the age of COVID in terms of participants and incentives. That's something to be explored because this is the actual reality for us. But one of the things I will highlight is that incentives are used as a means to thank people for their time because their time is valuable. Incentives are used to garner an increase in response rates. We have had the teams, our team out in the community without the money to compensate the participants because the processing of the grant through the university and then via what's called an advance check is cumbersome. It has been cumbersome. And I'm talking about the cumbersome nature of that as relates to the incentives via the advance check for the participants. And thankfully, I'm happy to report that the advance for the incentives came in on Friday. And the way that works, Friday, the 14th of January. We were in the community, as I mentioned before, in the fall, paying out of our own pockets to compensate those who we did interview. And I shared with the monitors that we are going to cease that process, awaiting for monies to come from the university so we can compensate our participants and not pay out of pocket. I also acknowledge something else that I want to reference in terms of incentives. So when you have a research team who's doing work like this is not, there's a commitment that the research team has. They have a commitment to it that's obvious through their attending training. They have a commitment to it because they signed up to partake as community interviewers. They have a commitment because they've been trained researchers and they understand how to be objective in terms of asking a question, not interjecting your thoughts or experiences or feelings relative to the nature of this survey. They have this commitment, but from a moral and legal standpoint, they too should also be compensated in a timely manner. So in addition to the incentive that wasn't available until this past Friday for our participants, we are still awaiting the processing of compensation for members of our research team. And prior to the break, one of the reasons I had to postpone a meeting that I had with the monitors and possibly with community, I think it was scheduled for December 14th, is because I was working diligently with the folks at Morgan State, where I am, to process the paperwork for the research team members so that those folks can get compensated. And I'm happy to report, as I shared earlier, that 2 of the 5 translators were compensated. One, as I mentioned, hasn't processed paperwork yet. She's international. There are 2 more who are awaiting their compensation as of the beginning of this, well, actually last week. It seems like it's a go in terms of them being paid. In addition, our coordinator also being compensated. So we have incentives for the participants. We also have the incentive to continue to do the work if you're paid and when you're paid as a member of the research team. So given that, we will be moving forward, thankfully, to having consistent meetings, bi-weekly meetings, to give updates on this time to data collection. Today is the 1st of 2022, being January 18th, 2022. The next one will be on Tuesday, February the 8th of 2022, because between now and then, we'll have more to report regarding the participants for this study. I'll just call out one of our interviewers. Caroline is one of our interviewers, and she's already gotten an invitation to participate in the community interviewer meeting. And via that community interviewer meeting, prior to that meeting, actually, Caroline, I'll be meeting one-on-one with the community interviewers to confirm that your paperwork is good so that you can too be compensated in an efficient manner regarding the interviews Caroline, for example, has already conducted, and some of the other community interviewers have already conducted, but they haven't been compensated as yet. One of the goals, however, for the community interviewers was to be compensated at the end of the project. So any paperwork and infrastructure issues wouldn't affect them. But what I am actually doing is moving forward to their being compensated intermittently as a complete survey. So we're working on that now for our interviewers. So that's quite a bit, but the incentive piece, as I mentioned very early on, is for the participants, those people who will be interviewed, and also the team of people who are doing the work to make certain this survey is done and done efficiently. And they have the incentive, thankfully, to continue. And I just want to thank Aaliyah for all of your work and me knowing what the deal is regarding your being compensated for your time. Just want to thank you.
You're welcome.
Your and please do follow up, as I shared, regarding confirming you are being processed. It should be something coming very soon. With that being said, we have little to no time for questions, but I will send out this recording as I've done in the past, and I will send out the link if persons, and when persons review this recording, if they have questions or comments, they can post via that link. In a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes, I'll be logging off in a couple of seconds, and I'll be logging right back into this because I'll be meeting one-on-one with the monitors. And Aaliyah, I know you'll be there, but maybe a little doing a little multitasking. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you hopefully on the 8th of February.
Thank you.